Welcome to our next session. Now we have Thomas and Benedikt from the SAP UI5 team who will show you a powerful team for a metadata-driven app approach with GraphQL and SAP UI5, SAP UI.mdc.
Thank you very much. So I hope you can hear me. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for the nice introduction. This talk is about GraphQL and MDC and how they're supposed to be a powerful team for metadata-driven apps. My name is Benedikt Schölch. I'm a product owner in the MDC team.
And I'm Thomas Büchler. I'm a development architect also in the US SAP UI.mdc team. Yeah.
So what is SAP UI.mdc all about? It's a control library containing several more or less well-known control. But let's summarize what we have here for everybody who might not know it. So there is a control that's called a filter bar, mainly used for, as the name suggests, filtering of, for example, other major increments like table and chart. We have tables and charts as well, tables for displaying tabular data with support for the well-known grid table and responsive table types. We have a data-driven field approach. That is kind of also one of the basics for the MDC library, where you can, you get a generated field for a certain data property, which means if you have a string, you get an input field. If you have a date, you might get a date picker. And this is something of the convenience the library offers to you. We have more or less a value help, which can help you to add values to these input fields, for example, helpful when doing filtering, and you want to have, for example, a foreign key relationship to a different data set. We have smart links, where you can navigate to other semantic objects. As said before, we have a very powerful chart that is currently still experimental in contrast to the rest of the library. And binding everything together is the functionality of personalization. So all of the major controls support heavy customization for users and key users. And all of these personalizations can then be stored into variants as well. We're going to see all of this in a little demo a bit later. Overall, the library is made for application and framework development and building metadata-driven controls, meaning you got a backend, you got your data. This data must be somehow described by metadata, and then our controls get into action and create the UI for you, more or less. It can be used with any UI5 data model or protocol, meaning you can use it with OData. We're going to hear of an example in a minute. You can use it with a JSON model or anything else you might have implemented, I don't know, in your work or in your free time. For your information, it's also a base for the SAP Fiori Elements floor plans for OData v4 and the Fiori Elements flexible programming model. And we also recommend to use it when you have an OData service. It makes really sense to use it with the flexible programming model or floor plans, because you don't have to implement the whole stuff you're going to see in this session yourself. But if you have any other models or protocols, it might make sense. I think the best news, one of the best news for today is the library is meanwhile generally available with UI5 version 1.124. So after, I think, roughly 8 years of development from the first few hacky lines of code in some editor to the production, it's now available in OpenUI5 since 2020, and in Fiori Elements, I think, even a bit longer. We meanwhile managed to get the experimental flag away for most controls, have a stable API, and I think a proper documentation provided in the demo kit. So there you can go and find all the information you need to know for your own projects. I would even say it's not only good with UI 5.1, it's even better with 2.0, because there you get the legacy free and I think also future-proof version of UI 5.2. So if you start implementing new apps, I would recommend to use that. So talked about the scope a bit now. Let's see how does that work actually. I mean, maybe some of you know already a bit of it. If you check the demo kit for MDC, this might not be a new chart for you. But I think for everybody who is completely new in the topic, it makes sense to explain a bit what MDC looks like internally and what it does for you. So MDC is more or less a design blueprint, a bigger control, like I said, the filter bar or the table with personalization settings. We implement this Fiori UX design patterns for you. You don't have to take care of that. So you get a big block, more or less, you can put in your application. You can rely on us that it's working properly, that users can understand it. And yeah, that is one of the major benefits you get. And the second thing is it creates for you the UI based on the metadata and the personalization settings the user has made. So this is what the control does for you. And how does that work? There you can see on the chart the gray box, the delegate, which has the responsibility to interpret the service metadata. You can see that in this schema, you see the fetch properties call is set up from the control to the delegate, where it asks, like, what is the service metadata? How does that metadata look like? And delegate interprets service metadata, maybe OData annotations and metadata, maybe a GraphQL schema like we might see later, and translates this into property info, our standardized format for properties, hands it back to the control, and the control can then create the items. Maybe those are filter fields, columns for a table, or data points in a chart, for example. And one of the good things is the delegate also provides customization options. So the creation of those items mostly comes with a standard by us. That is usually you return an MDC field, which takes care of displaying the data in the proper format. But you can also hook in and do your own custom implementation here and provide a very special control that you think might work better, like, I don't know, a rating indicator or a microchart. You're completely free to choose here. And this is also something that MDC does. It gives you this rich extension possibilities. Furthermore, I mean, like I said before, the design blueprint is pretty big. What is covered by the MDC control. So the filter bar has a lot of functionality. For example, there is maybe a live mode, maybe not. Maybe for the table there are specific behaviors when filtering. And if there is a question from the UX design side, like how the control has two options to work, for example, one way or the other. We implement the default usually. And if you like to have another behavior here, something very specific, you can also implement and override specific callbacks on the delegate to specialize this. I think that's pretty much it about the MDC. I hope you get a bit of a rough idea what is it about. And now we get to the other basics we need for this session for you to understand. So, Tom, I think this part is for you.
Okay, as we are showing a GraphQL-based project, we maybe should also explain what we are talking about. So maybe we start by explaining what actually GraphQL can do for you. So in general, GraphQL is a query language which is designed for APIs. It brings the major advantage of declarative query language, which allows clients to basically explicitly define which data on the backend they want to work with. So for example, if you are querying a user object, you are not forced to consume the whole object, but you can reduce it to maybe the field of a name and ID if you want to. This was initially created to allow mobile environments to lose some data, which is transported over the network, and to minimize the payload that is required for working with your applications. It also follows a single endpoint design. You are able to batch multiple resources into a single request, and due to the hierarchical nature of the data in GraphQL, you can also fetch related entities as well. This in combination with a strongly typed schema, which is basically self-documenting which types, which relationships, and which APIs are available on that backend, allows for a really powerful query language, which can help in scenarios where you have multiple clients which have to connect to maybe multiple backends as well. That schema, which you can also see here on the right, is used to validate requests from clients, and there are resolvers which are actually talking to the requested data and returning them through your server. And that schema itself is really interesting because it can be inspected from clients as well. So you can do stuff like automated documentation generation or type checking. And you can also integrate MDC controls pretty easy because our metadata-driven controls can easily discover available fields for personalization in the UI itself on the GraphQL server. This is really nice and comes really handy in our case. So for all these reasons, it's pretty efficient. So as said, you can, for example, reduce the payload of network requests. You can combine network requests multiple network requests into one. And you can also work with live data if you want. So there are capabilities which allow you to subscribe to certain backend events, like we will see in a few minutes. You can easily work with live data, like for chat applications or stock market visualization or stuff like that. By using GraphQL, you're also implementing some kind of contract, which can be well-defined even before implementation starts. So maybe it helps a little bit to make front and back-end teams a little bit more independent from each other. But in reality, yeah, we all know that many other factors may come into play with that as well. It is also evolution-friendly because clients basically have to opt into your data. You can extend services and objects on these services as you go without breaking anything or unintentionally increasing payload of these clients and their requests. Okay, so much for the theory. What actual implementations of GraphQL can we find? There is, for example, Apollo. Apollo is a whole ecosystem centered on GraphQL-based solutions. There is a broad offering of JavaScript-based server and client implementations, which you can integrate with your front and back-end technologies. There's lots of tooling and cloud services available for scalability. So, for example, you can combine multiple GraphQL services in a so-called supergraph, and you can build a whole landscape with Apollo, which can reflect basically all your data in your business domain, and it can be consumed by many services and what else not. Why is Apollo important? Our application will be based on Apollo server and Apollo client implementations and is heavily inspired by a project I think Peter Müßig and Damian Marik showed in UI5Con 2020, where they showcased the UI5 tooling-based integration of GraphQL into UI5. So I think we presented all the major topics. Maybe it's time to dive a little bit into the demo. Maybe, Benedikt, you want to show us a little bit?
Yeah, let's see that in action. Sounds pretty interesting so far, but let's show what it actually can do. So I guess most of you are familiar with this kind of UI. It's a list report application, very well known from Fiori Elements, or maybe also some freestyle implementations. And this one here is running perfectly fine on the GraphQL server. I mean, the data you can see here, those mountains are stored in the server. We query them via the Apollo client, like Tom said. And yeah, let's show quickly the functionality that we have here. So we have a basic search field that can just search the table, the text fields. We can have normal, for example, filter fields, where I get also auto-completion for the Mount Everest. As an example, you can see the list is filtered here pretty quickly. We also have a sophisticated value help functionality where I can choose several values by hand and add them. And also you see the list is updated and filtered. Furthermore, there are the personalization settings that I've already talked about in the beginning. So I can add certain filter fields, for example, here the height and the date of the first ascent of the mountain, and they're going to be added as filter fields. Here you see one is actually a date picker that is done by the MDC field, which automatically detects the data type and then exposes itself with a proper control for the use case. We can do the same on the table, so I have the height here already. That's pretty nice. Now let's check it out and sort it. And we see, okay, Mount Everest is still the highest mountain in the world. No big surprise here. Also, we can add some new mountains. Let's say we add the Katzenbuckel, which is the highest mountain in Odenwald, with 600, I think, 26 meters. And not much of a prominence, and yeah, I don't know the coordinates, sorry. I think that's everything we need. And you can see the data table is automatically updated. How that works, we're going to see a bit later, but that's a pretty interesting mechanism. Yeah, furthermore, we have a navigation to some detailed page here. You see we have some properties of the object, also queried via the GraphQL. Pretty easy. We have a AI-generated description down here, but that's not the topic of today's talk. We see here we have a subsection with the details again. looks a bit redundant now, but actually that's just to demonstrate a bit what happens when we update this mountain. For example, we supposed Mount Everest grew by 2 meters recently. I want to for sure maintain that, and I can do it here. Save it, and you see it's already reflected in the header here via normal UI5 data binding. From here we can navigate back to the mountains list, or actually to the range where this mountain is in. I can hardly pronounce it, so I'm just going to do the navigation. And you can see now the list is pre-filtered. This is done via our state util mechanism, so you can apply an app state to the MDC controls, which works pretty well. You can also then say, okay, I wanna store this state actually in my new standard variant. And then you can come back later to this application and you have this state. So that's pretty much it. I think I didn't forget anything. Then from here, let's go back to the slides actually, when I find them. And I want to introduce a bit how does that work? How is the integration between the MDC library and this GraphQL server, the Apollo server, the Apollo client, and also a JSON model done, because that's pretty interesting. It's a pretty different approach to what you know from normal UI5 data model applications. But let's quickly reiterate the responsibilities of the certain artifacts you can see here. So on the one side, we have the control, as I described before, fetches the property info from the delegate. In our case, that's a GraphQL schema, and the delegate takes over the responsibility to process this GraphQL schema into property info, returns it to the control, and as you've seen, it renders nice, proper items like columns or filter fields with a proper representation form of date picker, input fields, texts, and so on. So you don't have to do very much here. Expect implementing the delegate with the fetch properties. Then I think interesting part is how does the delegate fetch this property info? This schema actually accesses the Apollo client directly, which queries the server. The schema gets returned. This is a really interesting thing, because any change you do in the server now, if you've written this generic delegate, like for example adding another field to the mountain, whatever might be in there is directly reflected in the UI and can be used for personalization. So this is basically coming out of the box when you've implemented the delegate. I think that's a pretty cool feature which decouples your front end, let's say, from the specific backend service. I mean, not from the protocol or the implementation, but you could use just another GraphQL service which has some schema exposed and use your application there. A nice scaffolding approach. Let's have a look at how the data goes into the application. Apollo server for sure contains the mountain data, and the client takes care so that this is in sync with the client side. As you see, we already created a new mountain, and how does that work? The Apollo server provides the whole schema, which contains things like the queries and mutations, the types. The mountain is a type defined in the backend schema, and also events in form of subscriptions which get triggered like on an update or on a create of an item. So, and this is what the client listens to keep the data in sync. Apollo client, and a bit magic here. I put some gear icons to abstract that a little. There is a controller involved as well, but the interesting fact is it pushes the data that it retrieves from the server in a one-way manner into the JSON model, and the JSON model shows it on the UI. So there is no kind of two-way binding involved. Everything is just like unidirectional. Tom is going to show a bit more details on that here. I think that's pretty much it from the overview side. Let's go a bit into the details in a second after I show this nice citation, which could be the motto of the MDC library. It's called "Simple things should be simple and complex things should be complex." Possible, which was said by Alan Kay, one of the pioneers of object-oriented programming, who laid groundwork for many of the things we take as granted nowadays. And I think this is pretty much what we'd like to achieve with the MDC library. We want to provide some good defaults and make things that are simple easily possible, and also provide the options to make rather complex things possible. But with that, let's have a look at the details.
Okay, thank you, Benedikt. So now we'll have a look into the actual code. So maybe we'll start with our server. You can see here We are using just a simple JSON file as our sole data source for our application. In this JSON file, we can find a few lists of objects, in our case, some mountains, which consists of some more simple fields like strings and integers, but we also use some foreign keys as we want to group our mountains into ranges as well. And we also assign a list of countries to our mountains. Besides the mountains themselves, we also have some value lists for countries and ranges available, which are also not the complexest objects, but at least more than just a string anywhere. So the second thing we need is our GraphQL schema. You can see here there's a mountain type object defined, which basically looks a little bit like the JSON object we saw before, but will also bring the relationships into play to the actual nested objects. You can see here there's a list of countries available, which is also featured by the data type country, and also a range may be available, or even a parent mountain on the existing mountain we are working with. So in general, you can say this schema reflects all the available data types you have in your GraphQL service and also their relationships between. The other parts in here are also the API parts, which we want to expose to clients. They are also offered in that schema, and so you can basically document everything via the introspection features if you want to. But in our case, we just start simple here and just show you these two queries which we introduced for updating and creating mountains. And of course, we need some ways to read data, so we define something to read a mountain by its ID, or a list of mountains, ranges, or countries. And the last, a little bit more interesting part, is basically offering a subscription service as well, which enables clients to get notified instantly if anything changed on the back end. And the last part for our server is the index.js file, which brings all these parts together in combination with a so-called resolver object in our case, which contains the methods which reflect that schema, which actually talk to the data. So you can see here we have all these getters which just read our JSON data in memory and return it if requested. One thing to note here, we can also define how nested objects for our entities should be resolved as well. This enables us here, this code, to actually, from our simple ID fields, find the actual nested objects, for example, for our parent mountain in our mountain object, our ranges, or our countries as well. The rest of that file just considers itself with creating a server and launching the subscription service for our clients as well. So that's basically the server side. Let's maybe have a look into our client application and start with the main controller of our table view we just saw. You can see right away there is, if I open the correct file, the correct part, we defined this Apollo object, which basically carries all the query objects we need to initialize our controller and our data for our view. These objects contain a query and a binding path, or a binding property, which enables the controller with some magic to basically store any results when such a query is invoked into our JSON model, which we will see. I can show it right now probably. We have this base controller here, which is the sole entity talking to our Apollo client. It also provides some sugar and some convenience methods from that client on the controller itself, initializes our model, and basically only iterates across that object we just saw, invoking instantly queries if they are defined properly or configured properly, but you will also enhance the object itself, so queries can be invoked at any point in time if necessary. Okay, back to our mountain list controller. We will see the first query here just tries to resolve a list of mountains with all its or most of its available fields, and it will also query directly some of the nested objects, which can conveniently be done with the help of GraphQL and the resolvers we just saw. Besides the mountains itself, we also want to fetch the ranges and the countries to show them in our value lists. which help us to do filtering, or when we want to create a new mountain to have some data available to choose from. The next thing we see here is actually using a subscription. So in this case, we want to get notified if a mountain is created or updated, and every time this happens, we have an event handler here which just invokes the mountains query again and updates our JSON model via our Apollo controller feature. And that's basically almost it, what is in that controller. The rest is basically creating a mountain by taking the user input, modifying it a little bit, and also sending the query to the server. And the server, as said, will update the data on the client automatically via that subscription. So not much else to do here. Now we know how to work with the actual data, but we already talked a little bit about metadata, so we should also have a look at how this comes into play. We have this file here called GQL property info, which in our case offers a method to basically query the schema and its structural information itself. In this case, we are interested in our mountain type, and we want to know which fields and field types are available in that entity. And again, as Benedikt already mentioned, this is really, really handy when that schema gets extended, because the server may carry more, or the service may carry more features and more information on an entity. You instantly can consume it with MDC controls when starting personalization in any way. So showing a personalization dialog will in the end query that schema, will translate it to the MDC own property info format. In this format, you have the chance, for example, like we are doing here, to assign some data types. For example, we have the height and prominence here, where we want to add a little bit of a unit in our formatting, so just a small m to appear wherever this type is bound. And all of that is basically the language MDC needs to understand which fields are available for personalization, and allows you to customize them accordingly. Okay, so where do we actually make use of that? Maybe we should also have a look into our XML structure. You can see here, I hope it fits somewhat. We can see here is this MDC table tag, which defines one of our major MDC controls. It also contains some baseline rendering information like column definitions and internal controls. But the most important part is this delegate property, which you can't really see good here. Let me just move this a little bit. This delegate property basically is a way to realize our dependency injection approach. As Benedikt already mentioned, model and protocol-specific coding and customization can be done in a separate module. There's an API available which allows you to customize, for example, templating, or to customize filtering of such a table, and much more. And yeah, basically, besides that, we also offer for applications themselves the possibility to do some instance-specific configuration via a payload object, which you are free to design as whatever you want to transport. This data then can help you to work with these stateless delegate modules together with your control to realize the functionality you want. So maybe we have a little bit more time for a quick look into the delegate itself. Okay. You can see here we basically extend an object which is our default delegate implementation. As Benedikt said, we try to deliver some good defaults you can live with in most scenarios, but sure, the need for customization can arise. In our case, the first thing we do here is adding a base delegate, which defines a map of types, which we need because we added a length meter type, which you can find here, which is a custom type we have to somehow communicate to our control, and this can be easily made available via this feature in our delegates. The next and probably most important method in these delegates is the fetch properties. Benedikt already mentioned. This will call the property info we saw before every time personalization is started in any way. And besides that, we want to customize a little bit how items are created when we add new columns in our table. I'm not sure you showed it, but maybe I can just show it in a code here. For some of the fields which are available on our backend, in this case, the countries, we want to create a multi-value field, for example, because it's a list of multiple countries which can be assigned to our mountain, and all other properties will just create standard text controls. All of these can be easily bound to the configured data path, which you can also transport on your own via the update binding info method we also implemented here. The last thing we do here is we try to customize our filtering a little bit. We are using our default mechanics. This get filters method basically uses a mechanism as our, maybe I can show it quickly. As you can see here, the MDC table offers a filter property, which points to the filter bar we also placed into this view. And this will automatically lead to our default implementation of filtering, that the table will also consider external filters delivered by that, or external conditions delivered by that filter bar as well. So this is already in place in that code line here. But in our case, as we are using a JSON model in the end, which is read-only connected to keep that unidirectional data flow Benedikt already talked about, we want to add basic search functionality, which in, for example, OData we would already have, because we could just use a $search parameter or something like that on our binding configuration. But in this case, we just want to say, hey, we have some payload, we have 4 fields which we want to enable for our basic search. And this is basically a good example how you can easily, with not much code, configure your controls and customize them in a really efficient way. And yeah, that's pretty much it, what I wanted to show. I'm not sure, are we in time? Then now we can maybe have some closing words from Benedikt.
Yeah, thanks for the nice demo. I think it was pretty insightful. And I wanted to say something about what are the plans for the MDC library in the near future, so that you know what might still come. And yeah, depending on your feedback, might come on top of that what we even see here. So please, if you have anything, then reach out to us. We're in the expert corner in a few minutes. As said, the MDC chart is still in development, so we're planning a few improvements here, and also the general availability then not very much later. You can expect that APIs slightly change, but the whole functionality will remain for sure the same. We're currently working on an MDC form because yeah, like object creation is an important part of every application, I guess, which is in the style of our list reports and object pages. And here we want to give also some let's say, a better developer experience, a bit convenience, and also provide a form in the same manner as we do the other major artifacts. Then the docs and samples are currently, yeah, well, they are there. There are a few of them, and we're still working on it to improve it and add some more samples with more detailed functionality in the future. So, what should you take away from this talk? MDC enables metadata-driven applications. So it enables you to write reusable artifacts like the MDC control implementations with the help of a delegate. You can make them very much reusable with our delegate property and the payload, which is instance specific, like Tom showed. So you don't need to implement much more than the delegate and that, so that you can use it in your application suites or wherever with any UI5 model or protocol. So we also showed how it's not like depending on any specific model. You can use it with GraphQL, OData, and yeah, whatever else you want to try out or to implement. And the library is now generally available, so everybody is free to use. APIs are stable, and I think, yeah, that's pretty much it. If you're interested to learn more, we put some resources on the slides here. You can check them out later on. We put them on the session link. And with that, I would say, thanks from my side. I hope you enjoyed this one, and the other sessions are going to enjoy too. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We do have time for questions now, and I will be your microphone fairy. So if you have a question, please give us a note. And maybe.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for your presentation. It was pretty interesting. I have a quick question about the configuration with regard the middleware, for example, when it comes to GraphQL. Is there any configuration needed? I used it once before with Java, and it was with Spring, and I had to do configurations with Spring, obviously. So I'm wondering, is there any ties when it comes to using ABAP, for example, or to communicate the data with GraphQL and using it with this?
I think we didn't put the focus so much on what is behind the GraphQL layer actually. So we used the server more or less with local data, and we didn't dig too deep into that one. I guess this is really specific about the GraphQL. So Tom,
maybe that's a good question to ask Peter again for maybe UI5-based integration. Maybe he has some more details on how you could leverage GraphQL. So maybe we can meet in the expert corner afterwards and get some ideas on it.
Yeah, looks super nice. Thank you. But what I'm questioning is seeing the keynote and earlier the session about web components. I guess MDC, it's built on classic, let's say classic, web controls. What are the plans with web components?
Good question, yeah. I mean, naturally, as I said in the beginning, they're the design blueprints. They're more or less black boxes. So everything that is contained inside of the MDC is more or less independent from the rest of the application, shielded by API. So as Peter suggested this morning, there might be some, some reusability of web components in UI5. And we have, although we don't have too much concrete plans here, it's definitely technically possible. And as soon as it's available, we're also trying to look into this direction and see what we can achieve with that, and maybe reduce as much UI5 legacy coding when we can. But yeah, we have to dig into it as soon as we have the web components available with a, let's say, a stable mechanism. But it's definitely possible.
If you're lucky, it's just a one-to-one replacement.
More or less, yeah, because I mean, we use the UI5 controls as a framework inside. We're not really much dependent on their API, so there could be a high possibility that we replace a lot of them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then, sorry, I have one more. I see, and it's the same with Fiori Elements, new functionalities, new features. They are coming for V4, OData V4, to be precise. But many customers and many applications are still built on V2.
Yeah, the smart controls, you mean? Or like
Fiori
Element
smart
V2?
controls, but it's, I think MDC is the next smart controls version.
Yeah, you could say that. It's another smart controls, let's say it that way. It's not yet the next smart controls. We have the very mature smart controls library in place, right? There are a lot of new features. I mean, there are not so many new features added because there is not so much demand. I think the maturity is pretty high. So yeah, we're also thinking in directions like how can we improve the situations for ourselves and reduce the maintenance effort, but I cannot say too much about what is going to happen in the future. What might happen in the future for sure is like we make more reuse of our own code, and as the MDC library is protocol independent, it could for sure also be used with OData V2. And then you can combine one and one, and maybe we might find out that we can actually. I think we're already pretty close to replacing one of the smart controls already with an MDC control underneath to just benefit from the common code base, have to implement accessibility, theming, and so on only in one place. But it might not work out for all of them. So
thank you. I think it's important for the adoption by customers that you also support V2, because in reality they are not as high. They do not always use V4 or do not have always the version for UI5 to use this. Yeah. And then V4 is maybe already a step too far.
Yeah. That depends a bit on how much the numbers in the V2 apps are still growing, or how much the new apps are going to be built maybe on V4 rather than on V2, right? I mean, we see that there is a bit of, people are a bit in favor of the V4 stack in general now, meanwhile for new applications. But I think, yeah, we'll have to make our mind what we're going to do with the V2 stack as well, and how we're going to support that in the future as well.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I have a question. Can you also use them to replace smart input fields? So, for example, if I have now an input field which is having a text editor, and I want to replace it, for example, by a code editor into that one, is that also possible?
Yeah, theoretically yes, but I'm not getting the use case exactly. So from
Now
which
we
data-
have a lot of Fiori elements application, but then we have to rebuild in the code itself to replace the text multi-line text input for a code editor, because that one have more functionality. So my question is, without
Yeah,
that's a lot of code we have to do. So maybe this is an easier way.
It might be helpful, but it depends a bit what is possible in the Fiori element integration. So I'm not quite sure about that. So you have a Fiori elements app that renders this specific field. So if it would be like a plain MDC app, then it would for sure be possible. But that depends a bit on the extension options of Fiori elements. But maybe we can have a look at it in the expert corner if you like. So
Yes, okay.
Better
So
understand.
maybe one thing to add: the MDC field is perfectly capable of rendering custom content, and in combination with the custom delegation, you could try to rebuild some of these features. But we must have a look into the use
Yeah,
case.
I think it depends a bit how it looks like. So generally, yes, I think, like I said, most things are possible. It just depends on how complex it gets. We limit very much the capabilities or the extension capabilities of the library itself. Yeah. I'm pretty optimistic that can be done.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for the great talk. I really like that we can use now metadata controls for also non-OData models, which is really useful if you use a JSON model, or really, which is the only alternative. JSON models are a client model, and I was wondering, how did you do the filtering and paging? Are you doing that on the server side through GraphQL, or are you doing that in the client?
We cheated a little bit. We didn't actually implement paging yet. So, but
Is that on your roadmap? Because that is what we are struggling with as a JSON model-based
we are thinking
application.
about fleshing out this example we just showed a little bit more, to having as a learning opportunity in our samples collection, for example. So
That would be really great.
So yeah, we will have a look into it.
It's more or less, it's a showcase application. Not everything is super refined in there, but I mean the paging.
Which is valid. I was just wondering if you...
I mean, you already saw the publish and subscribe mechanism, so I think even a paging should not be too hard to implement. So let's maybe see what we can do before we maybe do an iteration on the published version.
Yeah, sure.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for the insightful presentation. You mentioned the usage of dependency injection when configuring the delegate of the binding.
Yeah.
Can we expand a bit on that? How exactly is dependency injection used there?
I think the initial idea of MDC controls was to being able to render without using any of these injected modules. So we always strived for an approach where you are able to define, for example, in XML how control should look like in a first render approach, basically. And we wanted to keep it up so that there's an asynchronous loading of the necessary delegated modules whenever you are working with some kind of personalization or model-specific coding. So this isn't completely true anymore today for all our controls, because some of them are heavily data-based, so they need to talk to models right away. But still, as said, the main benefit is separating the model and protocol-specific code and the customization and templating code from the actual implementation of the UI we get basically gifted by our controls.
Okay, but it's essentially the configuration that was shown in the delegate files, where you just supply the methods, the getters, and so on.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So I think we have time for one more question. If there is another one, I will come around. No? So you heard it. You can meet Benedikt and Thomas in the expert corner
Right now.
Right now?
At 2 minutes ago.
Okay, then for more questions, go over there and dig into the topic.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.